And we are live, beautiful people. Welcome this afternoon to another episode of Kiko's Freethinkers Forum, episode 133. We're joined again by Dr. Cornel West. You all probably remember him from a few episodes ago, episode 130. So a lot of my people in the audience haven't watched that first episode with Cornel West because they were so shocked that Cornel West was on the show. So you all need to watch episode 130 before you watch this episode 133. Dr. West is running for president of the United States. This is his first time running as an independent candidate. We're going to discuss the intricacies of his campaign and kind of where he stands right now with ballot access. We're going to talk about some of his policy positions. Unfortunately, I had to watch and endure some of the DNC mess with Kamala Harris and hear some of that speech. And so I did do my homework per Dr. West's request. But we just want to say here from Kiko's Freethinkers Forum to you, thanks for coming back onto the show, and we can't wait to have this conversation.
Brother, I tell you, I had such a good time last time. I said we could come right back. My beloved wife said, well, what's going on? You got all these other folk lining up, 30, 40 folk. I said, no, he's such a good brother, such a brilliant brother. And, of course, I didn't know about your beloved mother being sick, but she's bouncing back strong, and my prayers are with her, and all of the prayers of the prayerful with her, though, brother. And I know she's proud of you. And that makes all the difference in the world, man.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, they were actually the first people to call me. I had posted the interview. I was shocked. And I was like, what are you calling me about? And they were like, honey, you did such a great job. I was like, what are you talking about? And they had already watched the interview before I even knew about it. I had just posted it. So that definitely meant a lot to get that from the parents.
Absolutely. No, that's what it just shows great love and respect. It's beyond measure and beyond language that they have for you. And I know you have for them.
Absolutely. And let's just get started with this conversation. I will maybe slip in an advertisement towards the end, but I did want to ask you this question. We're going to bounce around here and there, but kind of get the audience, back into the fold. But I was curious, why did you choose Dr. Melina Abdullah as your vice presidential running mate?
Yeah, I try to keep the standards high in terms of people who have sacrificed so much, people who have connected the life of the mind to the struggle for freedom. And I say to myself, and who of her generation would put a smile on Fannie Lou Hamer's face? See, that's my criteria. That's old school. You know what I mean? That's like having a jazz band, somebody gonna play the saxophone. You say, okay, you're not Coltrane, but are you gonna put a smile on his face from the grave or as he looks over the porch of heaven? So you know what the standards are. And she's somebody who, the SWAT team has gone into a house 3 times. She's somebody who leads a weekly demonstration every Wednesday for the last 7 years in Los Angeles against the police. She's somebody who's been a very distinguished professor, and therefore she writes, she teaches, she acts. Most importantly, the bottom line is she loves the people. And so a lot of people were saying, well, I should choose somebody that's strategic. I should choose somebody who's, whatever, Latino or indigenous. And there's some magnificent Latino brothers and sisters out there, magnificent indigenous brothers and sisters out there. But when I looked at someone who had been consistent over time, year after year, decade after decade, that's who I wanted to be my fellow running mate. And thank God she consented. She said yes.
Well, that's wonderful. And I'm also curious to know if she had any input into some of your policies and positions on your Cornel West for President 2024 site. Is some of that her influence, or is that a collaborative effort? Where does she stand out in that?
Well, we wrote most of that up when I declared in June. That's 15 months ago. And so she and I have been together now just for a few months. So most of the platform was already in place before, thank God, she decided to join the team, as it were. Now, she's played a very important role since she's been here, or since she's been with the campaign, I should say. But the platform is already in place. Absolutely.
Okay, and regarding ballot access, I follow you very closely,
You very
and
kind. You very kind, my brother.
I have to follow everyone very closely. I have to make sure I'm on top of my game, when I'm talking to people. But it is encouraging to see you have it marketed as the biggest write-in campaign in history. Can you explain that to the audience, and where do you stand as far as ballot access across the country?
When you actually add the independent candidacy of West Abdullah, the Justice for All party that we founded, the various smaller parties. See, we've got the rural party in Alaska to put us on the ballot. United Citizens Party, which is the only black political party at state level that's on the ballot. That's South Carolina. Progressive Party in Oregon. United Party in Colorado. We have a number of smaller parties who were kind enough to put me on the Green Mountain Party, Peace and Freedom in Vermont. When you add the independent candidacy, Justice for All the party, we founded those smaller parties, and then the write-in campaign that we've had. We're up, we'll be up to about 45 states, man. Now, write-in would be about 24, between 23 and 24. There's about 4 states it's almost impossible to get on because their deadline was earlier. They had an impossible number of signatures in a short amount of time. But you're right that we should have write-in petitions. And, it takes, people need to realize it takes a tremendous amount of effort and in some cases money to even be a write-in candidate. Because you have to make sure all the petitions are in place such that when people write your name in, that you are counted. And of course, we've been, intensely and viciously attacked by the Democratic Party and others trying to keep us off the ballot. And that's a major financial challenge because they've got, corporate lawyers who making $900 an hour. And we got our volunteers out there working for free for the most part, trying to fight back the tremendous, what would be the right word? It's a kind of, it's a destruction machine. It's a machine to destroy third-party candidates, not just me, but this is true for Claudia De La Cruz and Brother Joseph Kishore and Jill Stein and Libertarian Party candidate, Brother Chase, and so forth. So there's an effort to ensure that only the 2 parties have access to the ballot. And they really do hire some very, very high-powered lawyers to take you to court. Poor Brother Ralph Nader, I was talking to him a little while ago. He said he had 24 legal suits against him simultaneously when he ran in 2000. Now, how you going to deal with that? There's no way you have enough money. And it's hard to find a lawyer because most of the lawyers are tied to the Democratic Party. They get blacklisted if they work with a third-party candidate in their careers and so forth. So it's very, very tight. I mean, it's not just ironic, it's downright hypocritical to hear parties saying they're fighting to preserve democracy when they're keeping these various voices and choices off the ballot in order for them to win by any means. It's raw and crude pursuit of power. It's really something to behold, my brother. It really is. But we're holding on. We've lost some cases that we won, landmark case in North Carolina, winning the case in Michigan, but they've appealed. So, that takes it to a higher court.
Well, but this is very important that you're revealing this information to our audience. And I know that we here at Kiko's Freethinkers Forum, we really try to focus outside of the duopoly. It's not that we haven't sent invites to duopoly candidates before, but we try to put our energy into direct action. And if we do electoral politics on the show, we do it outside of the 2-party system. We really need to try to think of building movements outside of this destructive duopoly. It's really just one party, honestly, if you look at just all the money that's invested into these campaigns. There's no public funding of elections. All these super PACs, all the dark money, and all the rules that are already used to rig against any independent third-party candidates as it is. I don't think people understand to the extent that this exists in the country. But having voices like yourself and Dr. Shiva and Dr. Stein and Claudia de la Cruz and Chase Oliver, everyone else mentioning this is crucial. And this kind of goes into a question I had specifically for you, because I'm thinking, I did an interview last week. I was invited onto a show, and I said to myself, why isn't there a unity party ticket on the left, the quote unquote, the so-called left? And so my question to you would be, was there ever talks of a unity ticket with you, Claudia de la Cruz, Dr. Stein, for instance? And what would that unity ticket look like, considering that you seem to be compatible with, there's genocide going on in Gaza. There's also wealth inequality. There's so many positions that you agree on. Why wasn't that unity ticket fulfilled?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, though, brother. It's connected to the larger issue of some kind of genuine unity on the left as a whole. And what happens is you have various people working in various contexts who have overlapping platforms and are concerned about the fundamental issues, which are poverty, mass incarceration, ecological collapse, unbelievable wealth inequality tied to corporate greed, genocide in Gaza, genocide in Sudan, the increasing occupation of Haiti. There's a whole host of issues out there. Reparations, which is something that I've been a part of for over 40 years. But each one of the organizations and individuals have their own distinctive histories. When I was with the Green Party briefly, I think that we had a chance of doing something like that. But then all of the various tensions and all of the various conflicts surface, and you do have to be true to yourself. You don't want a false unity or a pseudo unity. See, part of my challenge is I come out of a tradition that fundamentally believes that the Black freedom movement has been the leaven in the American democratic loaf. And that if you are not hitting the vicious legacy of white supremacy head on, then you will never be able to speak to the masses of precious Black people. And no matter how abstractly right your platform is, if you're not connected and grounded with the people, then they'll never have a sense of trust. They'll never have a sense of who you really are. Because there's a spiritual dimension and even a moral dimension of this that's very important. It's not just political. It's not just a matter of having the right political analysis or having the right political conclusion. You've got to have shown a deep love for the people, a connection with the people, a willingness to reside in their context and in their world. And therefore the question becomes, what is the relation between the Black left and the white left? What is the relation between the Black left and the brown left or indigenous left? Now as a Christian, I believe all of us, ought to be concerned about the humanity that's in all of us. So I'm a universalist. I'm an international across the board. But I do recognize that in America, where white supremacy continues to play such a vicious role, that if you don't hit that even on the left, you're not going to have the kind of unity that you need. And on the left, it takes the form of a certain kind of arrogance and haughtiness and condescension. Even though you agree, you still not really respect it the way you ought as a Black woman or a Black man or a brown woman or a brown man. You still got a lot of tokenizing taking place even on the left. So that the challenge becomes, how do we be morally consistent, and yet at the same time, how do we come together? Now, my dear brother Daruba, who I deeply love and respect, member of the Black Panther Party, went to jail 19 years, lives in Ghana. He's called for a united front on the left after the election. He and brother Kalonji's one of the grand and figures of his generation with Joy James and others is part and parcel of this. And I think a number of the parties, including the Green Party, myself, and others, are going to be part of that united left effort. But it won't take the form of merging into one party prior to the election. It will take the form of a united front with not just parties, but organizations, pre-party formations, various institutions would be a part of it. It would be a united left front, anti-fascist front across the board.
And see, the way I see it, there's a lot of relational components involved in this. Like you said, it's not just political, it's philosophical, it's spiritual. It's not just a political thing. That's what makes it so difficult, because you can't go against your own principles. And that's one thing that connects me, because I don't like the way the system is set up now. Is not even fair for like conscious voters, honestly. If you're looking for like a real democratic process, we don't have that right now. Like, we've already alluded to this, but I think people would focus more on their principles when it came to their vote if we had a different system, and if they thought about it beyond just politics, as opposed to just a sport or a competition. That's not what it's supposed to be, but unfortunately, that's what it's become, because of just the moneyed interest and everything else.
That money that you mentioned at the very beginning is so very deep. But you know, there's also a cultural dimension here. I mean, it's like if you were a member of a political party and they had a Friday night party and all they played was the Beach Boys and you was waiting to hear James Brown. There's a gap there culturally, even though all y'all got the same political analysis. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And we ain't gonna talk about, asking people to dance and how they gonna dance and things. So that, culture and dance can never be the fundamental criteria, but you have to bring who you are. And you see, when I speak or when I join organizations, I'm always true to myself, you see. And I am a Jesus-loving, free Black man. So people who think religion is archaic, people who think that Jesus was a farce, or people who think that Christianity or Islam or Judaism and so forth are pre-modern relics, hey, I don't ride with that. Now, I embrace my atheist brothers and sisters. I embrace my agnostic brothers and sisters. I embrace Buddhists and Jews and Muslims and so forth. But I'm bringing Jesus with me because I understand myself fundamentally as one who comes out of West Household, Shiloh Baptist Church, legacy of Martin King and Fannie Lou Hamer, and Curtis Mayfield and Nina Simone and James Brown. And therefore, I don't impose that on others, but don't ask me to erase that. And that's therefore a cultural challenge to so much of the left that has their own cultural prerogatives that they just assume.
Very well said. And I was also thinking too, before we segue a little bit into your policy and stuff, we have a lot to talk about in this remaining half hour or so, but I wanted to think a little bit beyond the political processes too, because this is your first time running around.
That's right.
As president. Like, this is your first run. And I'm just thinking, I proposed on that episode that I told you about last week about there's collaboration going on. Clearly, you have relationships with the other people running in the field. And that's why I kind of thought about the RFK, what happened with RFK and Trump and Tulsi and all these other people. They're clearly talking behind closed doors.
That's true.
Kennedy admitted that once Trump was the assassination attempt happened, he admitted that they talked on the phone and he offered him the VP spot then and there, and he rejected the VP spot. And then JD Vance ended up getting it. Like, this is all public record now. But my thing pertaining to third parties and independence is, why wouldn't that be like possibly if we're talking about down the road public funding? Because the last time a independent or third party was publicly funded was Ross Perot, because Ross Perot in 1992 got 18.9% of the national vote. So therefore, he qualified in 1996 for $29 million of that pool that was allocated to Democrats and Republicans. He got $29 million of that. And due to his 8.4% national performance in 96, in 2000, he got $12.6 million in public funding. So that's what I'm talking about as far as public funding, thinking in those terms. Could that be a proposal? Maybe you can't compromise on Chase Oliver on certain issues, or Claudia on certain issues, or Jill on certain issues. But could there be agreements like, hey, you could be in my cabinet if this, and this happens? I feel like third parties and independents are going to have to start thinking beyond the immediate moment if they're going to have to grow, if that means getting that 5% and then growing into something else. What do you think about that?
That's very real, though, brother. You're absolutely right about that. Because, I mean, even though there are differences between Brother Joseph, Sister Jill, Sister Claudia, myself, there's so much in common in terms of being anti-imperialist, critical of capitalism, anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic, anti-transphobic, and so on. You're right about that. You're very, very right about that. Mm-hmm.
While we're on this topic of geopolitics, this is something that hasn't been mentioned a lot, I noticed, because we talk a lot about Gaza. We know that there's issues going on in Congo right now with the genocide. We know that the United States has very strained relationships in its own part of the world, in the Americas. Me being a Latin Americanist, I'm very familiar with this. The United States strained relationships with the global South, especially on our side of the hemisphere. And so, having said that, I'm thinking about Venezuela right now. Venezuela. We know that the United States seized Nicolas Maduro's plane, if I'm not mistaken. And I wanted to get your reaction, just the elections, the recent elections in Venezuela, and just the relationship that we have with Venezuela, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, the basic attitude of the United States vis-a-vis Venezuela has been one of an imperial power that was fundamentally concerned about extracting profit on the one hand and supporting any regime that allowed them to continually extract that profit. And therefore, it has supported some of the most vicious military regimes in the history of Venezuela, and has played a role in trying to overthrow democratically elected governments in Venezuela. And Hugo Chavez is just the most recent example of that, when there were attempts to United States supporting military coups against him. Now, we have to be, again, morally consistent. We want to recognize that no matter who's in government, that you want to make sure that it's a government that is not corrupt, that is not in any way exploiting the people, and that is allowing dissonant voices to be heard. I was blessed to go down to Venezuela. I met with Hugo Chavez. We had a wonderful conversation there with Harry Belafonte and Tavis Smiley, and a number of it was very rich. And we pushed him because, he's also a Christian. So he and I had long discussions about liberation theology. And he's a lover of Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, which is a text that he required in the literacy program when he was making sure that people gain access to reading and what have you. And we had, it was Socratic. I know as an intellectual like yourself, it was Socratic. But he was zeroing in on poor and working people, because Venezuela, like so many Latin American countries, better than others, usually have oligarchies, and they have masses of people who are poor. They have a working class that's exploited. And he was trying to do something about it. It's very difficult to do that under conditions of embargo, It's very difficult to do that under conditions in which United States, the most powerful empire, not just in place, but in the history of the world, is imposing its will against you. And Cuba's probably the best example. And how do you survive when you have an American empire that's imposing embargo and other countries are discouraged to even engage in any kind of relation with you, let alone trade and what have you? Now, Maduro is not Chavez, and so we have to be very honest about that. Chavez is a very, very unique figure. I've always felt that the Bolivarian revolution that he called for was something that was crucial in the history of Venezuela, and therefore in the history of Latin America, in the history of this hemisphere. Did he make some mistakes? Oh, absolutely. Did he do some things I'm critical of? Absolutely, but I'm still a critical supporter of that Bolivarian revolution he was trying to do, in which he put poor and working people at the center. Now, what has happened since his death, I think about 2015, our dear brother passed. What's happened in his death is that you get successors who try to build on what he's doing. They are still viciously attacked by the American empire, but they come up with their own counter imperial strategies and tactics. And what we have now in this recent election, I mean, I find it very difficult to even make a judgment just about the election because I just haven't seen the evidence. I don't know what the data says. I believe that elections ought to be both free and they count the votes and allow the person to win who wins. But I also know that all of the U.S. imperial manipulation of the information and the misinformation and the attempt to undercut any trust in the election process, in what the materials and the material regime is doing, and then to prop up various candidates who strike me very much so as extensions of the American imperial project. But I can't make a judgment on the election because I just don't know. I was reading a recent piece in New York Review of Books on this, and they just said it was stolen. We know it. Why? Because we got certain percentage of the evidence and what have you. And I got to listen to that because I take seriously oppositional voices other than my own, voices that are critical of what I believe. But I'm still not thoroughly convinced, I must say. I think that the evidence is yet to be revealed exactly what's going on. And when you had the declaration of Machado and Gonzalez all of a sudden winning with no evidence, and the United States jumps on the bandwagon, of course they went, well, you see, I don't trust that either. I don't trust that either.
And it is hard to trust. And I'm trying to get Anya Parampil onto the show because her book, Corporate Coup, talks about how they tried to install Guaido, and then he fled the country. We're trying to recognize this fly-by-night person as the president of another country. Just crazy stuff. You can't make this stuff up, but people are like who don't follow geopolitics. That's why geopolitics is so important because it kind of shifts the critical lens on your own country. And I know it's hard to criticize your own country, but we have to look at ourselves before we criticize other places. We have to look in the mirror. And I don't think people do that properly, but that's what geopolitics taught me.
Absolutely. We have to have a commitment to truth and justice that is bigger than any nation state and bigger than any flag. And as a Christian, for me, every flag is under the cross. And that cross signifies unarmed truth and unconditional love. That's why when I heard my dear sister say that the greatest story ever told was the story of America, I said, that is pure idolatry, my sister. Get off the crack pipe. The greatest story ever told, the Palestinian Jew named Jesus, that fundamentally changed my life and the life of so many others. And I have appreciation of other religious traditions, but I'm talking about myself and what I know for myself. She said the greatest privilege is becoming an American or being American. No, the greatest privilege in life is to love and be loved. I don't care if you're in Ethiopia, South Africa, Guatemala, Germany, or Japan. You have access to that privilege of loving and being loved. And to think that somehow being an American is the greatest privilege because you have access to some prosperity and material toys is a sign of spiritual obscenity, moral bankruptcy. That's what idolatry is. That's what King meant when he said materialism, along with militarism, poverty, and racism will bring down the curtain on the American empire. That's Martin King. Those words still resound powerfully and loudly. That's my tradition. That's where I come from. And Martin King himself is not pure and pristine. He was a sinner like everybody else, but he was also a saint. And a saint ain't nothing but a sinner who looks at the world through the lens of the heart. And for Christians, through the lens of the cross. So everybody's a sinner. The question is what you gonna do with it. Martin did a whole lot with it. He told the truth. He pursued love and justice. That's why my campaign is about what? Truth, justice, love. It's old as a rock and new as foam.
Well, no one can say that you're not consistent. That's for sure. And we respect you for that. I wanted to, since you mentioned Sister Kamala Harris, we would slip this in because I had to go through that ordeal. So it's only fair that I slip in a question or two about that
ordeal. You are a high quality thinker and a serious worker. I can tell you that. You do your homework, brother. That's beautiful.
So we will get this in, and then the last 20 minutes, we can save that for your campaign specific issues, and then a few viewer questions before we go. But this has already been a wonderful continuation of what we started a few weeks ago. And I wasn't in doubt of that. I knew that it was going to be a great conversation in the company of Dr. Cornel West, running as an independent for president of the United States. And it's wonderful that the people are joining Kiko's Freethinkers Forum today. This is episode 133. Please share, friends, family, subscribe. Doesn't cost you a dime, just a little bit of time to expand your mind. And remember, you can't unthink free thought. As far as Kamala Harris is concerned, I watched that. It was hard to get through that. I got to tell you, I have to admit, super tough. But the one thing that stood out to me, and this has been a thing that has not been raised in the mainstream media, obviously, you have almost 100 policies, positions on your campaign site. You may have 100 policies campaign on your site. Everybody that I know that's run for public office has something on their site. We're 60 days from the election to the date. Like, this is the 5th of September. The election is November the 5th. Kamala Harris has no policy and platform on her official site. Now, if you put yourself in that same standard, Trump or anybody that's running in the field, how is it that she's allowed to get away with that 2 months from the election? You could possibly be the president and you don't have any position on your official site, and no one's holding her accountable for that.
That's so very true, though, brother. That's so very true. That was a whole lot of hype. There's a whole lot of frenzy. That talk about joy. And see, I come from a Black tradition where joy goes through grief and suffering and sorrow. If you got joy without sorrow, that's called cheap joviality. And that's what you saw in the convention. It wasn't deep joy. It was joviality. When Mahalia Jackson says, nobody knows the trouble I've seen, nobody knows but Jesus, nobody knows the trouble I've seen, glory, hallelujah. That last line is a line of joy because it's been through the trouble. It's been through the trials and tribulation. When Frankie Beverly say joy and pain, they're not talking about joviality. They talking about the way in which joy and pain go hand in hand. You hurt, you're wrestling with wounds and scars and bruises, and somehow you muster the will to transfigure it, or you have help with that gift of grace to transfigure it into a joy. That is what deep joy, see, that's Black people's joy at the deepest level, oppressed people's joy at the deepest level. What you saw there in Chicago was this great manifestation of what they call joy, but it was a market-driven joviality. That's a different thing. Joviality doesn't produce the blues, but joy will produce a howling wolf. It will produce a Nina Simone. It will produce a Curtis Mayfield. Joviality will produce a Milli Vanilli. Lip singing, superficial, on the surface.
Hey, I like Milli Vanilli now.
No, all the way lips, we understand they got a role, to play. But well, and I know that Curtis Mayfield and Sam Cooke and Sly Stone never won a Grammy. Milli Vanilli won 2. Well, I think Sam Cooke, for his records, ought to be in line before Milli.
That's true.
Oh, Curtis
Mayfield excellent point.
defines the line, but he didn't get no Grammy for his records. He did get one for Lifetime when he was in a wheelchair after he had that ugly accident in Brooklyn. But and I'm not saying that to put anybody down. Milli Vanilli gonna do his thing, but that's not the kind of song and music you want at a funeral. You see, at a funeral, you got to have some music to get you through. That's what joy is about, to confront the grief at the deepest level. And if you ain't got music for a funeral, then go on and stay in the nightclub.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this is an appropriate time to talk about your campaign because, in my opinion, I'm a issues-driven voter. I'm an issues-driven person in general. And so when I see your site, it's almost, and don't take this as too much of a critique, there's a lot going on. There's so many positions that you are attacking. You talk about gender equity, you're talking about racial justice, you're talking about economic issues. Like everything is so much, there's so much of an emphasis there that you can't just pinpoint one area of Cornel West campaign because there's just so many different facets and angles to it. But I was kind of the attention drew to me the fossil fuel industry. You talk about nationalization of the fossil fuel industry, the banking industry, the healthcare industry. And I see that going on, and that makes sense based on your principled approach on there. You can definitely explain that, how that would look under a West Abdullah administration. But I'm also wondering what parts of the government are you thinking about dialing back on? Because I see where you talk about the people having the control of those industries. But what would be some areas that you could downsize, for instance, in the government? Do you see any areas where we could downsize government?
Yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful question, brother. And again, I just appreciate the hard work that you undergone. This is not often the case in interviews with interviewers. So, you'd be surprised how many just looking for eyeballs without doing a whole lot of homework. You know what I mean? And you are what Socrates called a parrhesiac, which is parrhesia, a fearless thinker, a free thinker, a unintimidated thinker, and connecting that to serious discipline and action. And what we try to do is to speak to a variety of the issues that affect everyday people. And when I call for a democratizing is not always just a nationalizing. I want to make sure that there's civic oversight. I want to make sure people's voices play a role in shaping how institutions operate. So that a lot of people think, well, it would be government. Well, no, see, people's voices is not always the same as just government. Because government, you can end up highly centralized with an oligarchy within the government, just as you have an oligarchy within the private sector. You know, Frederick Hayek's great book on the road to serfdom, which was a right-wing critique of collectivistic governments. And he said the road to serfdom is when you have governments that have no accountability. Well, there's more than one road to serfdom. There's a road to serfdom in the private sphere when you have monopolies and oligopolies of which there's no accountability, but it's in the private sector, not the public sector. He was concerned about public sector. We have to be concerned about both. Mm-hmm. And so when I call for democratizing and nationalizing, it's not always really government. It's decentralizing so that communities can have stronger control and everyday citizens' voices can be heard. That would be true from the police. Who's going to police your community? people from the outside with hardly any accountability, who drive in and too often have negative attitudes toward the black folk in the community. Too many end up brutalizing black people, murdering black people. No, we need to have civic accountability and people's voices in who police them. Same would be true in the workplace. Same would be true in terms of, like you said, the public financing. Same would be true in terms of public control over cultural institutions.
Mm-hmm. And just to slip in a little bit of race matters, because we did democracy matters the last time around. We definitely got some of that in, but this is relevant because this is an issue that I think about a lot, is just this gentrification that we see in the inner cities, especially. And just the neighborhood segregation, honestly, is what it is. Even in 2024, you alluded to in democracy, not democracy matters, but race matters. Even on page 8 here, you said that back then, 86% of white suburban Americans live in neighborhoods that are less than 1% black, meaning that the prospects for the country depend largely on how its cities fare in the hands of a suburban electorate. What would your policies speak to as far as this issue that we have? We see it all the time. It doesn't matter what city you go to, Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, New York City, Nashville. It doesn't matter where you're at in the country, Houston. You see the clear stratification of people in these areas. What would your policies do to resolve some of these issues?
I mean, I do want people to be able to choose to live where they want to live. I am a libertarian in terms of ensuring and deeply committed people being able to raise their voices and pursue their ways of life wherever they want, as long as they don't engage in injurious harm to others. But when you have a policy that puts poor working people at the center, in which there's a human right for a house, quality house, there's a human right for healthcare, quality education, healthcare. There's a human right for education, quality education. There's a human right to express themselves. There's a human right to choose whatever religion they want to choose, and so forth. See, those to me are basic, and they constitute the kind of pillars of a decent and civilized society. When you have private equity companies that buy real estate all over the city in order to flip it over just for a profit, and then to make sure that racial segregation de facto is not legal anymore, but it's still Jim Crow Jr. It's not Jim Crow Senior. Jim Crow Senior was legalized. That was just apartheid. But you still de facto, in practice, in fact, you still have racial residential segregation in place. That has to do with how the real estate industry and how the landlords operate and cooperate to see who has access to which community and who has access to other communities. Well, we've got to break the back of that.
Before we get into some important viewer questions, I definitely don't want to leave these viewer questions out, because I have personal connections to both of these people that sent these questions in. The UBI Commission, what exactly is that? I was reading that. A lot of people are not really familiar with what universal basic income is. So are you proposing, is this a study towards universal basic income, or is this just like, no, you're saying I'm for universal basic income?
I'm thoroughly for universal basic income, which means that there's a social net below which no citizen can fall. That was the reason why the Aurora Party in Alaska was kind enough to endorse me. The first party, the first state to endorse me. United Citizens, Black Political Party in South Carolina, was second. But they were the first because their fundamental commitment is the universal basic income. But it's really not that radical. I mean, you know, Nixon was talking about this with Daniel Moynihan way back in the 60s and 70s. And Nixon is about as radical as I am Norwegian. You said, wow. And people say, oh, that sounds socialist. Well, you can call it whatever you want. I mean, as a Christian, I'm not impressed with any of these isms if they don't empower poor and working people. That's just my fundamental litmus test. The same is true with, imperial policy. You can call it whatever you want, but if you're engaging in genocide and ethnic cleansing wherever you are, then something is wrong. It's immoral. It's unjust. We got to raise our voices. And so the universal basic income is something that ought to be part and parcel of our basic policy in the same way free education ought to be.
Mm-hmm. And just to get a clarification, what are TCUs? Because I saw that's in the section with HBCUs. Can you tell the audience what the acronym means? TCUs?
TCU?
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember that. What?
It's in the section of historically Black colleges and universities. It says HBCUs and TCUs.
TCUs. Lord, I got to go back to my team and ask them what in the world they had in mind.
Yeah, I saw that in your platform.
Black, but
under the education area,
well,
I believe.
See, you're really doing your homework now. I got to go back and get informed by my team as to what they had in mind. When I read it, I was focusing primarily on historically Black institutions, though. It could be that it had something to do with indigenous brothers and sisters, but I'd have to check and see on that. I appreciate that. I'm sorry I can't answer that question.
No, that's totally fine. But that's what I was saying. There's a lot to but it's good to have transparency. That's the wonderful thing about having people's policies out in the open. You can receive like the praise, the criticism, and everything else that comes with it. But
Right.
That's why I made the comment. And I'm not going to tell people how to vote, but I'm just simply saying I can't believe that people hold people who are outside of the duopoly. How can you hold us to these astronomical standards when your candidate is running off no platform whatsoever, and you have the audacity to come to me and ask me why I'm supporting a person when your person is not even, they don't even have a policy on their side?
That's
like, I don't understand that.
That's a powerful point, though, brother. It really is. It's a powerful point. And I did see the day that Sister Harris, and God bless her, I prayed for her in terms of her safety and her precious family. And she's my AKA sister, but I think she just wrong as two left shoes on a whole lot of issues. Anybody who denies genocide or enables genocide, hey, that's a key sweat moment. Something just ain't right.
Mm-hmm.
Something's morally, spiritually, you can't rationalize genocide. I don't care what color you are, what gender, sexual orientation you are, you see. But you're absolutely right, though, that I think the idea that somebody could be out there without laying bare what their various policies are and what they stand for. That's the crucial thing, what they stand for. When you look at that Democratic National Convention and you look up and you see all those suites, some of them costing $2 million, some of them costing 1.7, some of them costing 1.5. The cheapest one was $500,000. And there were hundreds and hundreds of them up there. See, those are the ones who really control the party. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why you can't stand up against genocide is, APEC and others, they paying millions and millions and millions of dollars. And I don't want to isolate them. You got other lobbyists who paying millions of dollars too. That's the way the corrupt system operates. So you can end up with somebody running with hardly any platform because so much of what they already gonna do is implicit in the money that's coming to them.
Mm-hmm. That's a very important point that you made there. It's as simple as that. How are these people going to do something for the working class when they're backed by billionaires? I mean, it's not that hard to figure out. I don't think it is.
Absolutely. And her talk about, decreasing now the taxes on capital gains for the wealthiest. Why? Because they are speaking to her and she's responding to them. Well, I believe that Precious Jamal and Precious Letitia living in the hood, they're the ones that need to be protected. I come from a tradition that said you begin with the least of these. Those are the ones that have priority. When Jesus went into that temple, what did he do? He ran out the money changers, not because he hated the rich. He hated greed. And he loved the poor. He loved everybody, but he loved the poor. Well, people say, those kind of stories and religion does not play a role in politics. What are you talking about? We're talking about virtues, values, visions, and then we intervene in the politics.
We have to definitely get a few questions in before we
Sure.
go. Maybe like limit them to 2-minute responses, which is kind of hard with some of the questions. John, who is he created Near Dark Radio podcast. Shout out to John. He
Right on,
wrote
Brother
and
John.
said his abolition. He's talking about you. He said his abolition of poverty sounds silly to me, especially considering he's a Christian. Christ himself said that the poor will always be with us, but morally and culturally, he's truly a brilliant man, referring to Dr. Cornel West. Any response to that?
Well, the thing is, I wouldn't call it silly, though, Brother John, that there's a whole lot of things that strike us as nearly impossible, what we still ought to be about trying to fight against it anyway. That I believe that greed and fear and resentment and envy will never ever be eliminated in the history of the human species. But I fight against it every day. So that if something is silly only because it can be thoroughly accomplished quickly, or it can be thoroughly accomplished over a certain amount of time, then there's a whole lot of things that's silly, that's still worth living and dying for. You see, will love ever conquer the hatred in time and space? No, that's what the cross is about. Anybody who deeply loves people is headed toward the cross, because it's a cold and cruel world. Does that mean you don't love? No, you do it anyway. You do it anyway. We see this in the Black community. You know, we got so much, we have so few leaders these days who really love Black people. They love their careers, they love their money, they love gain, they love status, they love spectacle. How come? Well, because Black folk won't love you back. You don't love Black people because they'll love you back. You love them because they're worthy of being loved. Some of them might shoot you down. So what? They shot Malcolm down. They were wrong. That was gangster. He loved them anyway. Martin loved him anyway. Fannie Lou loved him anyway. Curtis Mayfield loved him anyway. So you don't just come up with some practical, strategic solution, and if it's not workable, then it's silly. No. Sometimes the foolish things of the world are the very sources of the wisdom as to how you live in the world. And that ain't me. That goes back to the biblical text. It goes back to the history of Black people, the history of oppressed people at our best. Now, at our worst, we gangsters and thugs and cowards like everybody else, and we have that inside of us. So yes, I am an abolitionist, but the idea of abolishing poverty across the board, across the world, might be something that's silly, but it's still something worth fighting for.
This last question is actually 2 questions, but the question 2 is a quicker response versus the first question, which is more of a philosophical question, envisioning an anti-fascist movement going forward. That could probably be a whole episode in itself, but let's just focus on question 2. If you want to respond at all to question 1, you sure can.
Sure.
What would you say to your supporters in Pennsylvania that won't be seeing your name on their ballot? Do you think a write-in slot can be effective in such a polarized Commonwealth?
Well, it's a wonderful question, though, because if we mentioned before, we got these write-in campaigns in these 25
And this is
states.
Anthony, by the way. Anthony, Voices of Poverty Project he's about to start. Anthony Dax Simpson.
And connected to the first question in terms of Voices of Poverty, fighting against poverty, no matter how difficult it is. But I salute both Brother John and Brother Anthony, because see, I can love and respect people who disagree with me. You know what I mean? I learn from them and so on. But I do think, in fact, that what was that second question again? Now?
Yes. So he said he's a swing voter. He's in Pennsylvania.
Oh, in Pennsylvania, that's right.
So-called swing state, and he said that supporters won't see your name on the ballot Do you think that a write-in slot can be effective in such a polarized Commonwealth like Pennsylvania?
Well, again, yeah, I just want citizens to be Socratic, to think critically for themselves and come down where they come down. See, I don't believe in just telling people what to do. I don't believe in people following Pied Pipers. Anthem of Black folk is lift every voice. It's not be an echo and follow me. We have to be able to all become voices. And so I would tell Brother Anthony, you come down where you come down, brother. And if in fact you figure, okay, I won't in any way compromise with any form of pro-genocide policy, and I write West in or write Claudia in or whatever it is, that's where you come down, my brother. If you think things are tight and therefore you want to go with Sister Harris and you're still against apartheid, then you're going to have to hold your nose and maybe drink a little cognac. Well, I don't want to be proper. I don't want to be pushing that on your show and things, but you're going to be tormented and tortured. But you figure, okay, this is where I want to come down. Then you come down. But I just think that I trying to make the strongest case that I can make. And once I make that case, I want people to decide. And if you decide to vote for me, write me in. Yes, indeed, indeed. But in the end, it's really a question of what kind of human being you're going to choose to be from your mama's womb to tomb. And voting is just one particular transient moment within that larger life to be lived and that larger truth to be pursued and that larger justice to seek.
On that note, I think we definitely need to conclude because I want to respect your time, and we can't thank you enough for coming back onto the show again. That first question from Anthony, again, that can maybe be for something after the election is over. Maybe we can discuss that because that's a very important question about anti-fascism going forward and just the threat of that just in general. But Dr. Cornel West, episode 133, beautiful people. It was a wonderful episode. I enjoyed every second of it, and hopefully you all do too. This is a global forum. Please share this with your information with your family and friends, and enjoy the rest of your day, beautiful people. And good luck with your campaign, Dr. West. And we will be following you very closely.
Brother, I salute you. I salute your precious mother, your magnificent family that you were singing praises for there in Tennessee. And you just stay strong, though, man. You're a force for good in a mighty way.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your time and consideration coming on to the show and just your knowledge and all your work you put in over all the years and the work that you continue to put in. Enjoy the rest of your day, and beautiful people, take care. Cheers, everybody.